Sorry or welcome for the informal welcome, and we'll let you all look formal or informal. We're so pleased to have you here today. Today's webinar is part of our efforts to keep you informed, allow everybody to learn from their colleagues, and share your own experiences as managers adjusting to the normal post-COVID. We've been focused, is it the new normal, next normal? Are we going back to normal? We've all agreed we are all in, nobody's going back. We're all new and trying to figure out what this new world means. My name is Leslie Wallach. I am Executive Director of National Association of Regional Councils. And so I welcome you today. Our subject today is back to work, what we're doing, how we're managing, how you all as managers are trying to figure out this new world. Now that the vaccine has become more available, and we know many of you are grappling with these decisions of office reopening, safety of your staff, your board members, and what the future office is going to look like. They're not easy questions for you all to answer, because we did a survey of members, and we do surveys all the time. Our average number of responses is about 10. This one, the responses keep coming in. So we understand that this is a really interesting and new issue for many of you. One of the things we're going to do is Macy is going to present some of our findings for you, just to see the kind of our quick and certainly a non-representative sample, but just a sample of what we're hearing back from you. So today we are pleased to bring you discussion with 4 leaders representing 4 very different regions of the country, as you can see from everybody's background. Going to share their thoughts on how they're thinking about their post-pandemic offices and meetings. Before introducing our panelists, I'm going to ask Macy to present take a few minutes to present some of the findings from the survey that we did. So I'm sorry, I'll turn it over to you, Macy.
Hey everybody, Macy Moore, I'm Program Coordinator here at NARC. Thanks so much for joining us. Just want to take a couple minutes to go through some of our survey results. So like Leslie said, it's not representative. We had about 60 folks respond at the time when I pulled the data, so it was a great turnout. Thanks everybody who contributed to it. So as you can see here, one of the first questions we asked is, when do you plan to go back? As you can see here, about 1/3 of people are already back, or they never left the office. But the majority of people are looking towards the future. So a lot of them are either the summer or the fall, or they're just not sure yet. As you can see with NARC staff, we're still home. So, and a lot of people still are. So it's just interesting to see the differences in everybody and where they're at. So these were the top 3 factors that regional councils said that they were considering in their decision to come back to the office. So the biggest was their general comfort level for employees to come back, how ready they were, and how comfortable they felt as far as with the pandemic going on. Very close second was widespread availability of the vaccine to the general population within the region. And then a little bit lesser down, the lifting of most or all stay-at-home restrictions that may still be within their regions that are still in place. So another question, and I know our panelists will get into a little bit of this later on, but when do you expect most people to be able to conduct work travel outside their region? I know you all are missing NARC conferences, and we are too. But as you can see, I mean, almost half the people just don't know yet. They're not sure. There's a small number that have already been traveling, but most folks are looking you know, if they do know, it's either the summer or the fall. But right now, we just can't say for sure. I think people are just watching this, see if another surge happens before, you know, most people are vaccinated by hopefully the summer. So this is interesting. So prior to the pandemic, how frequently did people report that employees were allowed to telework? And as you can see, a lot of people were in between never to a few times a month, maybe 1 to 2 days a week. But as you can see, it wasn't really a huge option. So then we asked the same question for when we thought people how frequently we thought people would allow their employees to telework after returning to the office. And you can see there's a clear shift from the never and a few times a month to at least letting people work from home 1 to 2 days a week, if not a little bit more often at 3 to 4. And there was even one that said we'll allow them to work full time from teleworking. The majority of employees note that. So really interesting to see the shift. And I think this is something we may see long term in the future. And finally, through responses to what regions think will change because of COVID and the long-term changes we'll see. So as you can see, more general meetings, more board of directors meetings will either have a hybrid or completely virtual platform. That was the vast majority of people that responded that way. So that was interesting. And as you can see from the last slides, more employees will be allowed to telework at least periodically or nearly or entirely full time. So telework is here to stay, it feels like, for a lot of folks. And finally, just making it easier for employees to telework in case of future emergencies. If future pandemics happen, I know a lot of our folks experience hurricanes and fires and big storms, flooding. So it's great that they are definitely putting things in place so telework will become easier in the future and it won't be such a big stepping stone to get there like we saw as soon as coronavirus pandemic started. So with that, I'll turn it back to Leslie to introduce our panel.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Macy. We also want to shout out to Chuck Bean at Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments, who inspired our survey, got this started. We had no idea we would get the kind of results we did. We will make them all available. I checked this morning, we had 67 responses. So we will put that together for you. We've also been gathering some of the materials that members are producing, which we will make available as well. Office policies and the kind of written documents that may be helpful to others. So now it's my pleasure to finally introduce our panelists. We're going to start on the East Coast with Christina Egan, Executive Director of the Greater Portland Council of Governments in Maine. That is not actually her background, we're happy to say, because we'd all be there instead. Oh, well, there's Miriam as well. Then next, going west will be Brian Martin, Miami Valley Regional Planning Commission in Dayton, Ohio. Not as scenic in his office, although Dayton is lovely. Mike Eastland, North Central Texas Council of Governments in Dallas-Fort Worth region, and also a lovely spot to visit. We encourage you all to get to all of them. And finally, Miriam Gilla-Wiles from the Southwest Colorado Council of Governments in Durango, Colorado. So thank you all for sharing. We have large, small, in between regions represented. So we are so pleased to have you with us today. I want to begin by asking each of you to share sort of how you're framing your decisions. What are the principles that your decisions are based on? Is it equity, age, marital status, young children, taking care of parents, pets that will never get used to you leaving again? So as you move forward with your plans to reopen, why you're considering it this way, and what generally are you thinking about? I'm going to start with Christina.
Thanks so much, Leslie. Great to be here with my colleagues across the nation. We don't think that things are going to return back to normal, how they were pre-pandemic. It feels very impractical to us to expect that of our employees who have really enjoyed a lot of flexibility over this last year where we've been wholly remote. And productivity has not been an issue for us at all. I think, in fact, we've been more productive, and I think all of us across the country are managing so much pandemic relief and so much service to our members that our staff has performed fantastically. So we used to be concerned that it was really critical to be in the same space, but have kind of discovered through this process that it's not as critical as we thought. That said, there are definite benefits to being in person. And so the way that we're thinking about it is there are benefits to being remote. A big one, of course, is work-life balance. And related to that, I think particularly for women, there's a lot of gender equity that can be achieved with remote working. Since women tend to do more of the caretaking of kids and of parents that need care. So we want to continue to extend that. We have a bunch of really talented women that work part-time and have caregiving responsibilities. And we think that remote, it's been really hard for them because they've been homeschooling their kids at the same time. But when kids go back to school, it's an added benefit for them to be able to have a more flexible schedule. And of course, there are benefits for the climate, and we're in the transportation business of trying to reduce emissions. So there are those benefits as well. But being in person, there's certain types of work that really lends itself well to being together, whether it's developing organizational culture, doing really difficult problem solving, creative problem solving. And so we want to provide some benefits for that. So we have 3 guiding principles as we start to think about balancing the benefits of remote and in person. The first, of course, is safety. And there's still a lot of uncertainty about whether people who are vaccinated can actually transmit the virus, how many of our staff are going to opt to get vaccinated, how much of our population will actually reach herd when we reach herd immunity. So that we're taking a very cautious and phased approach to going back to the office because of those safety concerns. The second one is more long-term. Hopefully the safety one will be something that we'll be done with by the end of this fall or winter, or mostly done with. But the other is trying to provide employees a lot of choice and flexibility going forward. We are still in a very tight labor market for the talent that we need, and we know that people really enjoy the flexibility. So it's a good workforce retention factor for us as well. But we also want to have some structure within that flexibility so we have the face time. And then the last piece is really around accessibility. And I think of this in 2 ways. We know from the literature that if you have half your staff working remote and half in the office, the ones in the office tend to have more access to decision makers. So we want to make sure that we have a level playing field among our staff. And then the second is public accessibility and decision making. And we've been thinking about, as we go from remote meetings, maybe back to some in-person group board meetings or committee meetings, that if everybody needs to be in the same venue. And we'll remember this from pre-COVID time, that if you had 1 person or 2 people on a conference call and 20 people in a room, those people on the conference call really couldn't participate at the same level. And so we want to have an even platform for the decision-making that happens. We will be retaining our remote access for the public though, because we've seen more people being able to attend our meetings. So again, safety and flexibility and choice for employees. And then lastly, equal access to decision-making. Those are our principles. Oh, you're muted, Leslie.
Of course. Brian, thanks.
All right. Thanks, Leslie, and Neil, and Macy, and everybody for inviting me to participate. Thanks to my fellow panelists as well. I think we're in a different situation from Maine. We've been in the office since May 4th on a split shift, if you will, by department, so that some departments are in for 2 days a week, others in for 3 days a week. It just depends on which Friday they go in, if it's payday or timesheet Friday. And we've done that since May 4th. We took off the first 6 weeks after the pandemic to where our finance and our IT folks were in. But for us, it's been going well. Even though we're in the office, we still have all of our meetings on Zoom. So that addresses the accessibility to the decision makers issue that Christina brought up. I think our competitive advantage is that we all have walled perimeter offices with doors. If we had a 4-foot or 6-foot partition environment, I don't think that we would have come back. So it was kind of retro when we did it. We followed attorneys into our current space, but it's proven to be an advantage for us so that we can have a good life-work balance. Teachers and parents of kids definitely are the top priority to make sure even though we have these shifts going on, they get the priority. Some of our employees are married to teachers, and then the kids may be in a different school district from the teacher. So, and homeschooling, some districts are in, some aren't. So we've been extra sensitive in that case to our employees. So while that's our goal to have 2 or 3 days a week, some only have 2 every week. But we trust our employees that they'll get the work done at home. I think we've been very productive. Our 2020 went very well, all things considered. The staff did a great job in meeting our milestones for our deliverables. Our transportation plan is about to be adopted. Our help with the census 2020 occurred, per plan. We met all of our commitments. So it's worked out. We have had some terminations though. Not everybody can work in this remote environment, as we all know. And so we've had to let some people go as well. So we've had, quite an effort here in the pandemic to make sure we get our work done. But I'd say just accommodating family needs is our top priority going forward.
Always. Thank you, Brian. Mike, how about you?
Well, we too have pretty much been a remote virtual environment. I've allowed many of our department directors and some of the people that we just have to have here to do the business to come in. We've observed spatial distancing. We have required masks. We too have a lot of enclosed offices as well as some workstations. And as long as you're in your enclosed office, we feel like we're in a fairly safe situation. But as we begin to open up, of course, health and safety are going to be the major things that we look at. That's what's driven us to this point. It's what will drive us into the future. CDC guidelines, what's happening in our particular region from a COVID case standpoint, how many vaccinations are taking place, what kind of herd immunity might we expect. My problem for the future is we've got about a little over 55,000 square feet of office space that we will be paying on until 2032. And to say that people can stay home, I don't know how our funding agencies are going to look at that. But with having that much space, we also have the ability to accommodate people. As far as how we're going to look at the future, it's going to be a fairness issue. And some of it is going to be driven by what it takes to get the job done, meaning our employees and our ability to hire people. But just because somebody has a child or has a parent at home, before COVID, they were coming to work. And to say now, you don't have to, but you who don't have a parent at home or a child at home, we're going to require you to come back into the office. So that's going to be something that we have to work through, but we'll probably do it based on fixed amount of time that you have to be in the office and fixed amount of time that you would be outside the office, but have that on a rotating basis to where we don't have everybody or a huge crowd here at the office all at one time.
Miriam, how about you?
Not a Zoom call unless somebody talks while they're muted.
Or a dog, right? Yeah.
Thanks for having me. This is really an interesting conversation. I really appreciate Macy and Neil and Leslie for putting that together. And it's good to see my colleagues, even if it's still on Zoom. So the Southwest COG we've been fully remote or hybrid since I started. My first employee had a small child and was pregnant, and it would have been really hard for her to be in the office because she was the main caregiver, and being real pregnant is kind of not comfortable and hard to sit at a desk. So from that, we created the ability to just work remote. We had online systems that allowed for that. It reduced our overhead cost for maintenance and IT. on top of it. So for the last 7 years, we've been doing it this way. So it was pretty easy to just be like, all right, everybody gets to stay home. Because we already had the systems in place and we already had that trust of the employees and those expectations of what work would be like, which made it much easier, I think, for us than it did for a lot of other groups. One of the things we also were doing pre-pandemic was using Zoom for our board meetings. So we always had a hybrid approach for that because we have a large region, terrible weather, long distances between communities. Asking someone to drive 3 hours round trip for a 2-hour meeting, it's challenging, especially in the wintertime when you have snow and animal hits and things like that. So we've been using a virtual and in-person solution for our board meetings. We too are not quite sure how best to go back into the office. All of us employees are on about the same vaccine schedule. So right now, all of us are in the vaccine mode, but some of my board members are not. And that's where the concern is like, what do we do? How do we have board meetings when we've got some people vaccinated and some people not? And we're all in a small room sitting elbow to elbow at a board meeting. That doesn't work anymore. But how do I tell my commissioners or our mayors who might not want to get vaccinated, like that they just can't come? That's one of the challenges we've been trying to figure out of what to do. Like the staff component is relatively easy. I think we're going to maintain a hybrid work environment since we did before. Now we're just not going to be all remote all the time, and have a staff meeting once in a while, like in person. It's going to be pretty amazing. But yeah, we don't know how to deal with the board part. So if anybody has any great ideas, I'd take that from you all.
Thank you. That's an interesting question about vaccines. What are you all thinking about vaccines for staff, number one, but I hadn't even considered the board issue, which is a whole different issue for you. Anybody else facing that yet or thinking about it?
I'm thinking about it. I think we're just starting here in Ohio to get vaccinated. I had my second shot on Sunday. We're not requiring employees to get vaccinated, but I am definitely talking it up and encouraging folks to get theirs as they're eligible. Yeah, our board members, that's another issue though. Some have been working remotely as a commission or council throughout the pandemic. And if they're small enough, with or without the public in the audience. So, and a lot of folks don't want to get the vaccine, even though they're eligible. So that's going to be a challenge. We've talked about a hybrid meeting. Here, the Attorney General has to allow us to have public meetings. The current authority runs through June 30 because of the Sunshine Law and public involvement. So we don't have the luxury that Miriam does in Colorado. So we're hopeful that it'll be extended. I've got a large board of 80. We're thinking about doubling the size of the meeting room that we were in pre-pandemic, but still having hybrid, and hopefully we'll have that option still. But yeah, our board members, pretty much have their minds made up and they're going to do what they want to do, I think.
Yeah, that's a tough one. Anybody else have any vaccine information to share or vaccine
We're going
knowledge?
to time our coming back based on vaccines being available. We feel like we could require it except for religious exemptions and some health related matters. I don't want to go there yet with our employees, but we are definitely going to encourage it. On the other side, if we do bring people back, it's not going to stand that, well, I haven't taken the vaccine. Well, you need to get one. No, I just don't want to take one. Therefore, I get to work from home. So we're going to have to work through some of those issues also. We're very fortunate here in the state. If we cover more than 3 counties, we can have a virtual meeting, and our chair of our council or board would have to be present in the office, but the others could join in. We only have 17 board members. We are truly a representative democracy with 225, 30 members. There's no way for us to let everyone have a seat on our board. So we have space to accommodate them. Our Regional Transportation Council, though, has 44 or 45 members, and they would be on top of one another. It's meeting management. And if you have part in and part out and keeping things flowing properly and not having people interrupt or the conversations broken, is going to be interesting also. Right now, I think for the executive board, we've got a lot of people who are ready to get back together when we feel like it's safe. But so we're really kind of in a crawl, walk, and I don't know if we'll ever get to run mode, meaning everybody's back in office and all meetings are here. We've had a great result with our advisory committees. We actually got more attendance, better participation, because people aren't having to travel from some distance, hour and a half for a 2-hour meeting and an hour and a half back. They can just dedicate themselves to that meeting time. So for our non-policy committees, we will probably keep a virtual approach to it, at least for a good while.
It's really important to note that we are not allowed to require vaccines because it's there's the emergency authorization, and they're not actually authorized vaccines. So we can't require our staff or our board to be vaccinated because of the emergency use authorization for the vaccines. Unlike if we worked someplace and it was like TB was an issue. So that's something to also take into consideration and to remember that we can't do that.
Is that a state law?
No, I believe that's federal.
Oh, okay.
I'll have to look into that. It's not my understanding, but anyhow, some of the lawyers we've talked with have indicated that you can require people to be vaccinated. Now, we would never do that with our policy officials. Let me assure you, I'm talking about with our employees.
I think it's because of the emergency use versus other vaccines, which are authorized there's just that little bit of difference there in the law. Also, I'm not a lawyer and I don't usually play one on Zoom. So, but I'll send over the information I've got to Leslie and she can send that out to the membership.
Yeah, that's a good information.
Yes, that is good. And we know that some people have spoken with their attorneys about whether they're able to or not to require. And yeah, so I won't give advice, but we will, any information that we have, we will send out to you. I'm just going to ask a question again about board meetings. Many of your board, I'm sorry, did I cut anybody off? Did everybody get a chance to answer that question that wanted to on the vaccines? So we've heard from some of you about, we've talked a little bit about boards and about meeting remotely. Board members that have to travel long distances are just as happy to meet remotely. So we've heard some of the challenges. What about state laws? I know, Brian, you addressed that. Your authorization only goes through June. Any of you all have challenges with that where you have to meet in person?
In Maine, we have a temporary authorization to allow for public meetings to be held remotely. We actually, our advocacy folks are actually trying to work at the state level to make that permanent, because we've heard both from our own members as well as from members of the public that having a virtual environment really increases participation. So we've had more people from further out from where we're located be able to participate than we did before the pandemic. And then we also have heard, like, we do a lot of work with transit riders, as I'm sure many of you have. And there's one woman in particular who just, we included her in our testimony, where she is a mother of 2, works several shifts, and hasn't been able to really participate before the pandemic, but now she can easily tune in and keep, a meeting on the background, and then, provide comment on the appropriate agenda item while she's still putting her kids to bed. So we think that there's a real benefit to keeping virtual participation. It's unknown whether that law will pass for permanent remote, but there's certainly lots of people that like it this way. And so we're hoping for that.
And as I mentioned, right now we have the governor has given permission for us to have totally virtual meetings, but because we cover more than 3 counties, we can come back to a mixed meeting so long as our chair or president is physically present where the meeting was officially posted, which would mean here in our offices.
I've read the whole
In
thing.
Colorado, we have to have an emergency declaration to have remote meeting, like fully remote meetings, because the state law requires there has to be a place for the public to congregate. And so that gets to be like a Zoom room and an emergency declaration. So we had to have that in, I think, April last year. We had a resolution saying it was an emergency and this is what we're going to do. And to keep our Zoom meeting safe, we just published the number of our Zoom meeting, like the Zoom meeting number, and then a link to Zoom. So that way it takes somebody who's scamming can't go scrape it and cause problems.
That's great.
One of the things that we're kind of struggling with is, if we're able to keep things virtual, I think that some of our board members are going to want to congregate in person for some meetings anyway. And so the question is, how do you do that without kind of making it like a second class participation if you're going to be participating remote? And I know we don't really have the technology yet in our conference room to put big faces up on one screen and have other people around the room. And probably all of you have been involved in Zoom meetings where you have 3 people who are spread out across a conference table and then 10 others that are on the Zoom screen. And like, it's just, you can't see their faces. They can't really see you. Like, it's just practically, it doesn't work all that well. And so we're again going to try to figure out, like, let's all be in person or let's all be on Zoom, because it again, it levels the playing field for people's voices and doesn't kind of disenfranchise one group or another, like whoever the majority is, whether they're all on Zoom or the majority is all in the room. But we haven't figured it out. Technology, like if you could do it hybrid, but at least my experience so far is that those meetings don't work well when you have kind of mixed venues.
We've actually had really good board meetings in the before times that were mixed. And that's because we set it up in such a way. So we have a 72-inch television that the board looks at. It's real big. And then we also have microphones and a sound bar. So that way it picks up the rest of the board who's in person, so everybody can actually hear each other. But we've been doing it for so long, just out of necessity prior to the pandemic, that I think because that happened, everybody was a little bit more comfortable just going to remote. And I think it'll be easy to go back to that mixed use. I can't remember the last time we didn't have somebody on a video during the before times or pre-pandemic, if you will. So we've always had that just because it's such a large area and the driving is really hard.
Yeah, I mean, we started looking into the hybrid meeting, and I've participated in some bad ones, to where you're on screen and no one can hear anything. You definitely have to have, the projectors and the laptops and the speaker system so that, and the moderators are huge, both online and in the room. So that folks aren't talking at the same time or across each other. So it's a major investment. And so we started looking and reading, into this. Most of my board are, in their 70s and 80s, and they've already had their vaccines and they're eager to see each other again. So the social aspect before and after the meeting. And, some are really eager to get back, but we're just not ready yet. Unless we did something outside, and we may do something, in a tent sort of environment, just so that they can get together, socially distanced, and we'll see.
Wow, so many challenges, different places. The questions are building up. So I have just 2 from our participant, from our people who are online. So I just have two quick things for if each of you has a response. How about staff member travel? Is that being allowed? Are you beginning with that? Are you going to be able to come to a NARC conference in September?
That's the key question. Hopefully.
We miss you. We miss everybody, right?
Yeah, I mean, for us, we actually have asked our staff not to have in-person meetings. You know, they can if it's really important and they do it outside, but our office is not to be used that way. And you know, if you extend that for travel, we haven't approved any travel for the last year, and probably don't intend to until we kind of have you know, more guidance, I think, from the CDC and more comfort internally that we've got a high enough vaccination rate among our staff that it's okay to start traveling. So, you know, probably if I had to guess, maybe fall or winter would be the time when people might start actually going back to conferences. You know, so long as we do have more of our population in the United States take up the vaccine.
Just real quick, we don't have a policy on travel. I mean, especially for COVID. Within the region, there have been on-site meetings and you know, socially distanced, you know, in a responsible way. I think there have been some trips over to the state capitol, but we don't have a formal policy. So I guess we just take it on a case-by-case basis.
I require any of our employees to get my permission, and that was just to keep a consistent approach. But generally, if they're going to a place where there can be social distancing, they know people are going to wear a mask, we've allowed them to do that. We'll be very cautious, honestly, about going to big conferences where people are tightly packed in a room, sitting at tables of 8 to 10 people. Until we have a good sense that we are at a point of herd immunity. We've not had our General Assembly. This will be the second year that we've foregone that just for this very purpose, that we know people shouldn't and most won't come to a meeting in person where there are going to be hundreds or 200 people in attendance. So we're playing it by ear.
We don't have a formal policy either. It's, again, that playing it by ear. But I do have a couple of commissions that have actually 3 out of the 5 counties have been having regular commissioner meetings with or without the public, but the commissioners all in the same room. Maybe masks, maybe not. And so that's been very strange to have to navigate with our commissioners who are like, well, we're meeting in person. Why don't you guys meet in person? Or how come you're not coming to our meetings? And that's been one of our biggest challenge. We haven't had any travel outside of the region since the beginning of the pandemic. And one of my staff who does the state's transportation advocacy organization is having an in-person meeting at the end of April. And which surprised, I think, everybody. And we had a long conversation about it, and it came down to what she was comfortable with. If she was comfortable going to a meeting, a conference, and then coming home and having to deal with quarantining from her family, that was her choice. Because we're not back in the office, she wouldn't expose other staff members. But the other issue is what is our liability if an individual gets sick at a work function? And that's a very personal one too, since I had that happen. We're not quite sure what to do there. And it's something that I want my employees to be able to make their best choices for them.
Well, I think this raises more questions than answers. I thank you all so much. I can see the questions are pouring in. I could go on, but I'm going to turn it over to Macy to see if she would be able to bring us some of the questions.
Thanks, Leslie. Thanks everybody for your comments so far. We have a lot of questions here, so I'm going to try to combine them as best as I can. First ones is, have any of the panelists considered a long-term shift to a hybrid work environment that would re-envision your workspace? So things like large dynamic collaborative spaces, hoteling for workstations, looking at the way you're using private offices, stuff like that.
I can jump in. We have an office configuration very similar to Brian's, where we have a lot of individual offices around an area, and then we have a conference center where people gather. And we're not exactly sure what's going to happen, and we're going to probably be playing it by ear before we make any definitive plans. But if we make some assumptions that eventually we will all be safe to be in spaces without masks and without 6-foot distancing, then we will likely reconfigure how we've laid out our space. I mean, we've asked our staff what their preferences are, and we've got some staff that really love working remote. They could do it forever. They're really happy just by themselves working and they're productive. We've got other staff that really want people around. They're extroverted and they get energy from that. We have some staff that don't have great home office working spaces for whatever reason, and they need office space. So, you know, we're thinking about using the office, being much more intentional about what is the office for. And for us, it's about, you know, team building, culture building, and probably kind of complex decision-making or problem solving where we need to have face time. And it could also be for people that really don't have a good working situation at home or feel like they need to have some kind of in-office space. But that's not going to be everyone. I mean, we're not even thinking about day on, day off or teams here and there. We're thinking about, here are some meetings that are required to be in person. The rest of the time, you can probably work remote. And that frees up a lot of office space. And it probably means that we'll get rid of some of our individual spaces and create smaller meeting places so that project teams, they can decide to meet in person, they can come in and they can work there. And then there'll be some other spaces where people can sit down on their laptop if they have space between that and the next meeting, but not really trying to accommodate everybody to have their own workspace, particularly if a lot of people work from home. And me as the director, I'm planning on continuing to work remote, probably for 3, maybe 4 days a week. So that will make it easier setting the culture that we can continue to work remote, and that the office space is for an experience and it's for intentional face-to-face meetings. Now, all of that is just said in an intense environment of uncertainty, and we don't know exactly what we're going to do, but we are thinking critically about those things.
First week of May.
Anybody else want to jump in on that?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, Miriam. I'll just say we're set in year 7 of our 10-year lease. So I figure we've got time to see how the market may shift. For now, my planners and engineers love having their own space. I don't see giving those up. Our question is, you know, in our smallish 10 to 12 to 50 person conference rooms, are those big enough for COVID and 6 feet of separation, and how many could meet there? So I think it'll be a while before we host any in-person meetings exclusively. I think Zoom is with us. We'll be paying that monthly fee, annual fee for a long time. And the masks, I think they're definitely here to stay. We're in the office, but we're masked up when we go out of our office and into the common areas. So I think that's here to stay.
So we only have a few offices because they're pretty small, but one of the offices is shared with several staff members. So it will be who both like working from home and have been incredibly good at it. So I think that would be a staggered of one person in the office at a time. Even though we'll all be vaccinated, it's just like, what does that mean in the transmission of things? We just don't know enough. And it's that uncertainty where, yes, we could all get together. We could all work 100% probably in the office, but there's some folks who don't want to, who have become really productive at home, even more so than they were before. And B, the understanding of how the vaccine inhibits spread or does not inhibit spread, but just protects the individual is not quite known. And I'm not comfortable at forcing us all back into a space. So we're just going to play it by ear in the office. And we turned the internet off, so I guess I'm going to have to turn that back on soon.
All right, I'll just jump to our next question then. And I feel like Brian might be able to speak to this based on our conversation before the webinar. What would you say your biggest challenges have been with recruitment efforts, trying to get new folks on the staff?
Yeah, always a challenge, but we've been pretty successful just based on the reputation of the agency. You know, we've had to fill 8 positions during the pandemic. You know, we had 2 retirees. They went ahead and retired after 20 and 30 years of service, and finding replacements for them, it was difficult. It may have taken longer for those positions than usual to find planners because not everybody wanted to travel. You know, we told staff we expect them to be in the office some, to move into our region. We hired a gentleman from Chuck Bean's area, from DC. He's our equity manager, so you met him a few sessions ago, Carlton. And until he actually came, I wasn't sure if he was coming, but he started on time as requested, as promised. So maybe it's taken a little bit longer, but we're fully staffed now. And I like our team. We've gotten a lot younger because of the retirees. And so far, so good.
We've hired somebody too during the pandemic. And recruiting is really hard, I find, for regional jurisdictions, because you want somebody who has some knowledge of the areas you're serving or communities or things like that. So that for me has always been one of our biggest challenges. So hiring during a pandemic, with that layer on top of it, was challenging, but we were able to find an individual who's very talented and does understand the region. And we actually had worked with previously in a different role, so that helps. But yeah, it's a challenge on a good day, let alone a pandemic-y day.
Yeah, we probably hired 15, 20, 25 people during this time. We've not had a problem getting resumes. As you say, we've got a reputation that a lot of people want to come here, get experience. It's worked out well. Our test is going to be our director of workforce development is retiring, and we're now in the process of recruiting for that position. So at that level, I don't have the answer to the question yet, but based on using the search firm that we have, they're not expecting that we're going to have a great deal of trouble. Plus we have a couple of really good in-house candidates also, but it's not been an inhibiting factor for us or cause limitations on the type of skill set that we need.
And Macy, I would just add that for us in Maine, we've also hired about a half dozen positions or so during the pandemic. And it's strange to have people on Zoom that you've never met in person. I can't wait until we can finally get together. But when I think about recruitment, it's one of our biggest, recruitment and retention is a really big issue for us, because as soon as we train people up, our municipalities want them, right? And so we look at salaries and benefits, and like we're a little bit higher than nonprofits. We're about at the same level as municipalities and state agency, but our benefits are a little bit below that. So we really need to recruit, as kind of Brian alluded to, like on the reputation of the agency and mission, but also on flexibility. And I think that's why this remote environment has really created for us an opportunity to be as flexible as we possibly can for employees, because that's our competitive advantage in the workforce market, particularly for women.
Yeah, I would second that, especially for women or yeah, household caregivers and the main caregivers in the household for sure. I will say my partner's business, he works in the private sector. They're requiring everybody to move back into the office as soon as the state allows it. And they're already starting to see attrition of people being like, I don't want to do this. And so they quit. They just full on quit so they can find a job that will let them work remotely. So I think that that's been really interesting to compare like what's actually happening in the private sector. You know, good dinner conversations and fun things like that.
And other employers, I mean, if you look at what's happening in the private sector and read the literature about corporations, they are going heavily remote and towards kind of this idea of employee choice. So, you know, that means, you know, we're going to be fighting against some of that, particularly in consulting firms and things like that. So, you know, we're doing a lot of deep thinking about what our competitive advantage really is and how do we continue to offer the best of a remote working environment while making sure we retain culture and creativity in a team.
Thanks. I know we're coming up on time pretty quickly here. So this next question, I'm going to ask everybody to say what their staff size is, because that's a question that keeps coming up. I guess people want to compare their staff sizes to you all. And here's the question. So someone said they had a staff of 61 people, and they're concerned about full remote working having negative impacts on collaboration between staff that don't normally work on projects together. So maintaining an organization culture requires intentional effort. They're allowing partial remote working, but staff must work most of the time in their private offices, of course. And so this mitigates health concerns. But he's wondering at the end of it, can you talk about how to avoid those traditional silos that are becoming more of a problem with remote working and folks kind of staying in their lane and, you know, not being in person where it could be more collaborative?
Well, I have a staff of 25 here in Dayton. We're a separate regional planning commission, but we're a unit of local government. We're the MPO. So mostly planners and engineers and administrative staff. So we got our staff meeting today on Zoom because we're split. And we don't foresee that changing. Even after more and more people come back to work in person, we just think everything's going to be safer on Zoom. We're going to keep our rotation schedule going as well. We don't see that changing either. So that's MVRPC in a nutshell.
But is that question about how you have cross fertilization and don't get into silos?
Yeah, I think now because we're teleworking, you know, it's easy to not see somebody from the engineering department and think, oh, we should work on this together. That's not happening as organically. So what are you doing to sort of mitigate?
Yeah, we have a staff of around 400 people. And so we have to really be intentional on a project by project basis of who all can contribute to this project and from what departments do we get those skill sets. But we are large enough and we have office space that is spread out on 4 floors in a main building and 2 floors in another building. And so we really have to work it from this needs to be looked at rather than it's just organic. That people say, oh, I saw you yesterday. You want to help them on this project? It's not that simple for us.
We have a staff of under 10. And because so I'm going to follow that from the staff of over 400. And so because I think we've started this remote work or the hybrid thing 7 years ago, it has become culture to engage with each other in a digital format that isn't, and in a person and in-person format when we're in person together. So we utilize a chat function all the time, texting, and now we're having more Zooms together. We have a standing board meeting once a week, or not board meeting, excuse me, a staff meeting once a week that we do now Zoom. We just moved from it being an in-person time to online time. And so I think we've developed this culture intentionally or even unintentionally that allows for that engagement through various means, digital and in person. But we're also a younger staff. I actually am the oldest employee. So that does also change the dynamic a bit.
There's child labor laws, you know.
Even with our 25, we have to be intentional too. And I've got to model it with my directors, teamwork. Some of my staff hasn't even met everyone else, you know, with a third of the office being new. So it's a challenge.
Yeah, within our transportation department, which is just under right at 190 people, they can get siloed so easily themselves, being in the very same department but doing different functions. So everything has to be, really does have to be for us very, very directed and intentional.
Great, I'm getting the hook here from Neil. So Christina, anything you want to add in super quick before I turn it over to Leslie?
Well, I think the question is really, it's less about remote versus in person. It's more about intentionally creating collaboration, which you can do in both environments.
I agree.
Great.
I have a question. So is there, who is giving time off to their employees to like paid time off for a vaccination appointment? Or is that just something under your PTO or sick leave that you would allow?
That's generally what we do. We haven't dedicated a specific amount of time that, hey, you can go get a COVID shot, but we're encouraging our employees to do that. And they can get it done using their own time. And
It's like a doctor visit, you know, I mean, just an appointment to get a shot for us.
We think that we're not going to have an issue with our staff getting vaccinated, but my chief operating officer and I have talked about if it looks like people are not getting vaccinated, we might do some sort of incentive, you know, whether it's a gift certificate to, you know, a local restaurant, because we're doing work with local restaurants to keep them alive during the pandemic, you know, something that links to our work as a way just to give everybody a little boost to make sure that they get that boost in the arm.
Great ideas, great suggestions. Thank you so much. All right, Leslie, I'm going to pass it over to you to close this out.
Thank you, Macy. Thank you so much to all of our panelists and participants. I mean, the questions keep coming. There are so many questions. We will continue the discussion. We will send out more information, and it sounds like we're going to need to do another check-in webinar in a month or so to see where people are. We thank you so much for giving your time, for your expertise. For you or any of the people on the line, if you have further questions or information that you'd like to share, please send it to Neil. Our emails are very easy, just most of us, Neil, N-E-I-L @narc.org. And that way we can collect information and make it available. We've been collecting the notes. This session is recorded, and we will make that available to you soon. But this is an ongoing discussion, and it sounds like we will be having this discussion at least through the fall, and maybe not in person. So we look forward to seeing you all on Zoom. We thank you so much to everybody for joining us. Have a great afternoon.
well, thank you guys at NARC and all the fellow panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Everybody have a good day.
Yeah.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you.